I'm Claire, 29, female, and I just discovered my entire family lied to me, took a secret luxury vacation to the tropics, and paid for it all using my credit card. I found out because my cousin posted a photo of them on a yacht, and in the background, sitting on the bar next to a bottle of champagne, was my high-limit travel card, the one I gave my mother for true emergencies only. The worst part wasn't the lie. It was the realization that to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was just the bank, and the bank was about to be closed. My family operates on an unspoken set of rules, rules that were written long before I had the salary to break them. There's my mother, Brenda, a woman who wields guilt like a master craftsman. There's my father, David, her quiet, passive enabler. And then there's my younger sister, Chloe, the designated golden child. Chloe, at 25, still lived at home, floating between part-time jobs and her dream of becoming a social media influencer, a dream funded primarily by my parents, and by extension, me. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one. I left home for college on a partial scholarship and a mountain of student loans. I worked my way through a degree in computer science and landed a demanding but lucrative job as a tech consultant. I was proud of what I'd built. My family, however, seemed to view my success not as my own achievement, but as a new, upgraded family resource. Their financial problems had magically become my financial problems. I remember the first time the dynamic became painfully clear. About 2 years ago, the transmission on my 5-year-old sedan gave out. The repair bill was a staggering $4,000. I called my mom in a panic, not to ask for money, but just to vent. Her response was a sigh followed by a lecture. "Well, Claire, this is what happens when you don't budget properly. You need to have an emergency fund for these things." I had one, but it wasn't meant for a catastrophe of this scale. I ended up putting the entire repair on a credit card and spent the next year aggressively paying it off. Just 2 months later, Chloe totaled her car, a much newer model my parents had helped her buy by running a red light while texting. There was no lecture for Chloe. There was no talk of budgets or emergency funds. Mom and Dad simply drained a significant portion of their savings to buy her a replacement vehicle outright. When I brought up the hypocrisy, my mother's voice grew cold. "That's different, Claire. Your sister was distraught. We had to take care of her. You're more resilient." Resilient, I learned, was family code for you're on your own. Favoritism wasn't just financial. When I got a major promotion at work, the one that made me a senior consultant, I called my parents, buzzing with excitement. My dad said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." My mom added, "Does that mean you'll have to work even longer hours? You shouldn't let them burn you out." The entire conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. A month later, Chloe landed a weekend job as a barista at a trendy coffee shop. My parents threw a celebratory dinner for her. "She's finally finding her passion," Brenda announced to the relatives they'd invited, her voice beaming with pride. I sat at the table, picking at my food, feeling invisible. The issue of the credit card came up about a year ago. My parents were planning a trip to visit my aunt, and my mom was having trouble with the airline's website. "It keeps rejecting my debit card," she'd said, her voice a knot of frustration. "I'm so worried these prices will go up." To make things simple, I offered to book the flights for them on my card, and they could pay me back. It was easier that way. My travel card had no foreign transaction fees and offered great travel insurance. After that incident, my mother proposed an idea. "Claire, for emergencies, what if you made me an authorized user on that fancy travel card of yours? That way, if something happens and we need to book a flight quickly, like if a relative gets sick, I can do it without having to bother you at work." Hesitated. My gut screamed no, but the look on her face, a rare, pleading vulnerability, chipped away at my resolve. I was traveling constantly for my job, and sometimes I was in meetings for hours on end, unreachable. The thought of them being stuck in a real crisis felt worse than the risk of her misusing the card. So I laid out the rules with the clarity of a legal contract. "This is for true, life-or-death emergencies only, Mom. A medical crisis or a last-minute flight for a funeral. That's it. It is not for shopping, not for dinners, not for anything else. Do you understand?" "Of course, honey, I would never," she'd promised, clutching my hand. "You're such a good daughter." I ordered the supplementary card. When it arrived, I handed it to her and reiterated the rules. My father and Chloe were there, nodding along. "We get it, Claire," my dad said. "Imeh. Argencies only." For a year, it was fine. I kept an eye on the account, and the card remained unused, a silent testament to a trust I had cautiously extended. It sat in my mother's wallet, and I slowly let my guard down, believing, foolishly, that this time they understood a boundary. The phone call that set the stage for the grand deception came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a complex project deployment, and my phone had been buzzing on my desk for an hour. When I finally got a break, I saw a string of missed calls from my mother. Bracing myself, I called her back. "Claire, I've been trying to reach you," she said, her voice laced with a performative sigh of disappointment. "Sorry, Mom, I was in a work session. Is everything okay?" I asked, my mind immediately jumping to the emergency card. Was someone sick? "Oh, everything's fine, I suppose," she began, her tone shifting to one of weary martyrdom. "I'm calling about the summer. Your father and I have been looking at our finances, and things are just so tight this year. The cost of everything is going up." I listened, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Usually, this kind of talk was a preamble to a request. "We've decided we're just going to have to cancel our trip this year," she announced. The trip was an annual tradition where they'd rent a beach house for a week, and I was always expected to come along and foot a large portion of the bill for groceries and dinners. "There will be no vacation for us. We're just going to stay local, maybe do some work around the garden." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me feel guilty. I wouldn't have to burn a week of my precious paid time off on a trip that was always more stressful than relaxing. I wouldn't have to navigate Chloe's moods or my mother's passive-aggressive comments about my work schedule. "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry to hear that," I said, trying to sound sympathetic. "But it's probably a smart decision to save some money." "Yes," she said heavily. "Chloe is very disappointed, of course. She was so looking forward to getting away, but we have to be responsible." Here it came, the guilt trip. I felt a familiar tug of obligation. "Well, look, if it's a matter of a few $100s, I could help out," I offered, even though I knew I shouldn't. "No, no, no," she cut me off quickly, a little too quickly. "We couldn't ask you to do that. You work so hard. We'll be fine. We just wanted to let you know so you don't keep the time off work free." Something about her quick refusal felt off, but I dismissed it. Maybe she was finally learning to respect my financial boundaries. Maybe they were genuinely trying to be more self-sufficient. It was a nice thought, a hopeful one. "Okay, Mom. Well, I'm sorry it's not happening, but I understand," I said. "Let me know if you need anything." "We won't, dear. You just focus on your work," she said, her voice now dripping with saccharine sweetness. "We'll talk soon." We hung up and I stared at my phone for a moment, a strange feeling settling in my stomach. But the pressures of my job quickly took over and I pushed the feeling aside. The project was intense, demanding 12-hour days and complete focus. For the next 3 weeks, my life was a cycle of work, sleep, and takeout food. I barely spoke to my family, save for a few brief texts. The silence was, frankly, blissful. I imagined them at home, just as they said they would be. My dad puttering in the yard, my mom tending to her garden, Chloe probably complaining on the couch. I pictured their quiet, frugal, local summer. I even felt a pang of sympathy for them. While I was earning more than I ever thought possible, they were cutting back. Maybe when this project was over, I thought, I'd treat them to a nice weekend away, somewhere close. I'd pay for it all, a thank you for their supposed fiscal responsibility. The irony is that I was feeling closer to them than I had in years. Their lie, this grand performance of austerity, had worked better than they could have ever imagined. It had not only provided them with a cover for their scheme, but it had also softened me. It had made me feel grateful and appreciative. I was proud of them for tightening the belt. I was the perfect, unsuspecting Mark, wrapped up in my own world, happy to believe the pleasant fiction they had so carefully constructed. The storm was gathering on a sun-drenched horizon thousands of miles away, and I didn't have a clue. The project finally wrapped. After 3 weeks of relentless pressure, my team and I had successfully launched the new software. My boss told me to take a few days off, an order I was more than happy to obey. That Friday evening, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was truly relaxed. I ordered my favorite pizza, poured a generous glass of wine, and collapsed onto my couch, ready for a long, mindless evening of scrolling through my phone. I scrolled past work. Memes, updates from college friends, and news headlines. It was peaceful. Normal. Then, I saw a new post from my cousin Megan. She wasn't a prolific poster, so I was always curious to see what she was up to. The photo was breathtaking. A group of people were laughing on the gleaming white deck of a magnificent yacht, with a backdrop of impossibly blue water and a lush, green coastline. My first thought was, wow, I wonder where Megan is. I zoomed in, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't just Megan in the photo. Standing in the center, arms slung around each other, were my mother, my father, and my sister, Chloe. My dad was wearing a garish tropical shirt I'd never seen before, a wide, goofy grin on his face. Chloe was holding a glass of what looked like champagne, posing for the camera with a practiced pout, the aspiring influencer in her element. My mother, Brenda, stood between them, beaming, looking happier and more carefree than I had seen her in years. They were not in their garden. They were not staying local. A wave of confusion and hurt washed over me. Why would they lie? And how could they afford this? A trip like that costs a fortune. Were they in massive debt? Did they win the lottery? My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe Megan had invited them. Maybe it was a prize. I kept staring at the picture, my eyes scanning every detail, trying to make sense of the scene. The gleaming wood of the boat, the half-empty bottle of expensive champagne, the plate of exotic-looking fruit on a small table. And then I saw it. My heart stopped. It was a small detail, something almost anyone else would have overlooked. In the background, sitting on the polished surface of the yacht's built-in bar, was a credit card. It was a dark, metallic gray with a distinctive silver logo. It was my card. There was no doubt. I knew its weight, its color, the way the light caught its brushed metal finish. It was my premium travel card, the emergency card. I felt the air leave my lungs. The pizza on the coffee table suddenly seemed nauseating. The wine in my hand trembled. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. It was right there, sitting in the open like a trophy. They hadn't just used it, they were flaunting it. They were so comfortable with their deception, so confident in my ignorance, that they didn't even bother to hide the evidence. My mind flashed back to the phone call, my mother's heavy sighs. Things are just so tight this year, her quick refusal of my offer to help. No, 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 we couldn't ask you to do that. The careful, deliberate lies. They hadn't just decided to take a trip. They had planned to take a trip on my dime from the very beginning. The story about staying home was a smokescreen designed to keep me from looking too closely at my accounts, to ensure I wouldn't ask questions. The hurt was sharp and physical, a stabbing pain in my chest. It was the casual cruelty of it all that broke me. The smiling faces in the photo felt like a personal mockery. They were laughing, drinking champagne, and living in luxury, all funded by my hard work, while I was running myself into the ground on a project, believing their lies, even feeling sorry for them. The sense of betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete and utter disrespect. The profound, staggering revelation that my own family saw me as nothing more than a convenience, a tool to be used for their pleasure. I sat there in the dark of my living room, the glow of the phone illuminating my face. The shock slowly began to recede, replaced by something else. A quiet, focused, ice-cold anger. They thought I was a fool. They thought they could get away with it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My hands were trembling, but my mind was unnervingly clear. I put the wine glass down on the coaster with a steady hand, my movements precise and deliberate. The photo of my smiling family on the yacht was still burning on my phone screen. I took a screenshot, saved it, and then closed the app. There would be no frantic, tearful phone calls, no screaming matches. Anger like this didn't need to be loud, it needed to be effective. I opened my banking app. My finger hovered over the icon for my travel card, the one linked to my travel wallet where I stored all my points and benefits. I tapped it, and my breath hitched. The current balance, usually near zero as I paid it off every month, was astronomical, but it was the transaction history that made my stomach clench. It was a waterfall of charges from the past week, all from a place I now recognized from the coastline in the photo. St. Bart's, the jewel of the Caribbean, an island playground for the ultra-wealthy. Staying local, my mother had said. I scrolled down, and the scale of the betrayal unfolded in a neat, chronological list of expenses. First, there was a charge from Azure Yacht Charters for $12,500. It was listed as a deposit. Full cost would likely be much higher. My mother, who haggled over the price of tomatoes at the farmer's market, had chartered a private yacht. Then the daily expenses began to roll in, a steady stream of pure indulgence. $850 at a beachfront restaurant called Le Sable. $1,200 at a high-end boutique named Calypso. My sister Chloe's doing, no doubt. $460 for water sports equipment rental. I could just picture my dad trying to jet ski. Another dinner, this time for $975. My eyes scanned lower, and the charges became more audacious. There was a single charge for $3,200 from the Cheval Blanc Spa. A spa day that cost more than my monthly rent. I imagined my mother, the woman who claimed they had to tighten the belt, getting a forehand massage and a seaweed wrap, paid for with the money I earned sitting in a cubicle for 12 hours a day. The image was so grotesque it was almost surreal. And then I saw the final, pending charge. It was from Azure Yacht Charters again. The description simply read, crew gratuity. The amount was $2,800. A tip. They were planning to leave a nearly $3,000 tip on my card. The sheer audacity of it, the flagrant, unapologetic entitlement, was breathtaking. I quickly added it all up. The charges already posted, plus the pending tip, brought the total to just over $21,700. In 1 week, they had spent more than my first year's salary out of college. And who knew what other charges were still pending, what other souvenirs or lavish meals they had yet to bill. The ice in my veins began to burn. This wasn't a simple misuse of the card. This wasn't an oops, I used the wrong card moment. This was a premeditated, large-scale financial assault, executed under the cover of lies. They had used my trust, my hard work, and my love for them as a weapon against me. The emergency card, a symbol of my willingness to care for them in a crisis, had been twisted into a tool for their hedonism. I thought about the rules I had so carefully laid out. For true, life-or-death emergencies only. I thought about their promises. Of course, honey, I would never. The words echoed in my mind, hollow and mocking. All the small hurts and slights from over the years, the dismissals of my achievements, the endless funding of Chloe's whims, the double standards, all of it clicked into place. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the ultimate expression of our family's toxic dynamic. I wasn't the resilient one. I was the workhorse, the utility, the faceless benefactor whose purpose was to fund the lives of the people who truly mattered. I leaned back on the couch, the phone heavy in my hand. The initial shock had passed. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache. But the fury had crystallized into something hard and sharp, resolve. They had made a grave miscalculation. They had assumed I would eventually find out and that I would react as I always had, with anger, then resignation, and finally forgiveness. They assumed I would yell, they would apologize, and I would ultimately swallow the cost because that's what family does. They were wrong. This was not a family matter anymore. This was fraud, and I was going to handle it as such. The decision was made. There would be no confrontation. A confrontation would give them the opportunity to deploy their usual weapons. My mother's tears, my father's disappointed silence, Chloe's accusations of me being selfish and ruining their happiness. It would become a messy, emotional drama where I would inevitably be painted as the villain. I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. I was interested in consequences. Cold, hard, and immediate. I looked up the number for my credit card's concierge service, the 24/7 line for their premium cardholders. I took a deep, steadying breath and dialed. A polite, professional voice answered on the first ring. Thank you for calling the Onyx Card Concierge. My name is Andrew. How can I help you this evening? Hello, Andrew, I said, my voice eerily calm. I need to report a series of fraudulent charges on my account, and I need to do it immediately. Of course, ma'am. I can certainly help you with that. Can you please verify your name and the last four digits of your social security number? I provided the information. Andrew pulled up my account. Okay, Ms. Thompson, I have your account open. Which charges are you referring to? All of them, I said. Every single charge from the last 7 days originating from St. Bart's. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. I see a significant number of transactions, Andrew said carefully. Azure Yacht charters, several restaurants, a spa. The total is quite substantial. Can you confirm that you were not in St. Bart's and did not authorize these charges? I can confirm I am currently in my apartment in New Jersey, I stated flatly, and I did not authorize a single one of them. My mother is an authorized user on my account, but the card was given to her for use in a documented life-or-death family emergency only. I have text messages confirming that she was supposed to be at home, staying local, during this entire period. This trip was taken without my knowledge or consent. It is, by definition, fraud. I used the word deliberately. It was a precise, legal term, not an emotional one. Andrew's tone became even more serious. I understand completely, Ms. Thompson. Thank you for clarifying. We take these situations very seriously. He was efficient, a calming presence in my controlled storm. What I'm going to do now is transfer you to our fraud department. They will open an official investigation, and we will begin the process of reversing these charges. First, however, I need to deactivate the compromised card immediately. That means both your card and the authorized user's card will be shut down permanently. Is that okay? That is exactly what I want, I said. Very good. A few more clicks. Okay, the cards have been deactivated. No further charges will go through. Please hold while I connect you to a fraud specialist. A new voice, a woman named Maria from the fraud department, came on the line. I repeated my story, this time in more detail, explaining the emergency-only agreement. She was sympathetic but professional. She walked me through each charge, one by one. Azure Yacht Charters, $12,500. You are disputing this? Yes. Le Sable Restaurant, $850. Disputing? Yes. Cheval Blanc Spa, $3,200. Disputing? Yes. We went down the entire list. With every yes, I felt a knot in my stomach loosen. It was like I was cleaning a wound, methodically removing every piece of shrapnel they had embedded in me. When we got to the last one, the pending tip, Maria said, and I see a pending gratuity charge for $2,800. Since the card is now deactivated, this charge will automatically be declined when the merchant attempts to process it. All the other charges will be placed under review, and the funds will be credited back to your account within 24 to 48 hours while we investigate. Given the circumstances you've described, I'm confident the investigation will rule in your favor. Thank you, Maria. You've been very helpful, I said. After hanging up, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. But I wasn't done. The card was only one part of the equation. The Travel Wallet app was the hub for all my benefits, hotel statuses, airport lounge access, and a massive bank of points I'd been saving for years. I had also, in a moment of weakness, shown my mother how to access it in case she needed to book an emergency flight using points. I opened the app, went into the settings, and found the family sharing section. I saw my mother's name there. With a single tap, I clicked Revoke Access. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to remove Brenda Thompson from your travel wallet? All shared benefits will be immediately inaccessible. I pressed Confirm without a moment's hesitation. Then, for good measure, I changed my password and enabled two-factor authentication tied exclusively to my own cell number. I essentially froze the entire account. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The trap was set. The payments were reversed. The card was dead. The travel benefits were gone. They were on an island, thousands of miles from home, with no money, no way to pay their final bills, and no idea that their luxury bubble was about to burst in the most public and humiliating way possible. All I had to do now was wait. The silence lasted for 28 hours. It was a tense, quiet period where I did nothing but wait. I cleaned my apartment. I organized my files. I did everything I could to keep my hands busy and my mind from replaying the betrayal over and over. I knew the fallout would begin when they tried to check out of whatever hotel they were in, or, more spectacularly, when they attempted to settle their bill with the yacht company. It was the pending $2,800 tip that was the real-time bomb. A tip is the last thing you pay before you leave. My phone, which had been silent, buzzed violently on the kitchen counter. My heart leaped into my throat. I picked it up. It was a text message from a number I recognized as my cousin Megan's. The message was in all caps, a frantic digital scream. "Did you really just do that?" I stared at the words, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. It had happened. The bomb had gone off. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother handing the now useless piece of metal to the yacht captain with a magnanimous smile, expecting him to be grateful. The awkward moment when the machine reads card declined. Her confusion, her trying again. The mounting panic. Before I could even formulate a reply to Megan, a second text came through from her. "Claire, they are being kicked off the yacht. The captain said all the payments were reversed. H. E's calling the police. Mom is crying and Chloe is screaming at everyone. What did you do?" So it was even more dramatic than I had imagined. Being escorted off the yacht, their luggage likely being held as collateral. The public humiliation in front of the other wealthy tourists at the dock. It was a fitting end to their charade. I took a moment, savoring the image. They had wanted the lifestyle of the rich and famous, and now they were getting the ugly, transactional side of it. No money, no service. I typed out my reply to Megan, my fingers steady. It was short, precise, and held all the anger I had been suppressing. "With interest." I hit send. Not 2 seconds later, my phone began to explode. First, a call from my mother. Her contact photo, a smiling picture of us from years ago, flashed on the screen. I silenced it, then a call from my father. I silenced that too, then a text from Chloe. "Chloe, you are a monster. You left us stranded. I hate you." Another call from Mom, silenced. A voicemail notification popped up, then another from Dad. Then a string of increasingly hysterical texts from Chloe, filled with typos and rage. "Chloe, they took our bags. We can't pay the hotel. This is all your fault. You are a horrible, selfish person, and I will never forgive you." I read the texts with a detached sense of finality. It was like watching a building demolish itself. For years, I had been the foundation, silently supporting the whole unstable structure. Now that I had removed myself, it was all collapsing into dust and rubble, just as I knew it would. I put my phone on silent and placed it face down on the counter. The frantic buzzing continued for another hour, a desperate, distant vibration. They were trying every emotional tool in their kit, anger, guilt, pity, but their tools no longer worked on me. I had been inoculated by the truth. Later that evening, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. It was my aunt, my mother's sister. They must have called her for a bailout. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it later. It was a rambling, confused message about how I needed to be the bigger person and help my family because they were in a terrible situation. I deleted the voicemail. Being the bigger person, I had learned, was a trap. It meant silently accepting disrespect. It meant setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. I was done with being the bigger person. From now on, I was just going to be a person with boundaries, a person who demanded to be treated with respect. The family I had known was gone, and I felt nothing but relief. A week passed. The barrage of calls and texts eventually slowed to a trickle, then stopped completely. I learned from Megan, who sent me one last, cautious text, that my aunt had ended up wiring them enough money to book flights home on a budget airline. They had to leave most of their new, expensive purchases behind to pay a portion of what they owed the hotel. They came home not with a tan and happy memories, but with the bitter taste of public humiliation. I did not reach out. I did not answer their calls. I let the silence stretch, creating a vast, unbridgeable canyon between my life and theirs. During that week, the credit card company concluded its fraud investigation. As expected, they ruled entirely in my favor. Over $21,000 was permanently wiped from my statement. The bank sent me a letter confirming the resolution and a new, shiny card with a new number. A fresh start. I realized that the anger had mostly faded, replaced by a profound and peaceful sense of clarity. Their betrayal wasn't a spontaneous act of poor judgment. It was the inevitable climax of a lifetime of entitlement. They had never seen me, Claire, their daughter and sister. They had only seen a resource, a utility, a problem solver. Their love and affection had always been conditional, directly tied to my usefulness. By cutting off the money, I hadn't just protected my finances. I had revealed the true nature of our relationship. There was nothing left to salvage, because there was nothing real there to begin with. Finally, after 2 weeks of silence, I decided it was time for one last communication. It wasn't for them, it was for me. I needed to formally close the door. I unblocked their numbers and drafted a single, simple message. I sent it as a group text to my mother, father, and sister. The bank has concluded its fraud investigation. All charges have been permanently reversed. This is the last time I will ever discuss finances with any of you. Do not contact me about money again. Any future relationship we may have will depend on you respecting this boundary. I didn't add a love, Claire. There was no love in this transaction. It was a statement of terms. I hit send, and then I blocked them again, this time with a feeling of permanence. A few days later, I was sitting at my laptop, looking at my bank of restored travel points. I had nearly 1,000,000. Of them, a treasure trove I had been hoarding for some vague future. I had always imagined using them for a family trip, a grand gesture to finally win their approval. Now, they represented something else entirely: my freedom. I started searching for flights. Not to a crowded beach resort, but to a quiet, beautiful place I had always wanted to see. The mountains of New Zealand, the historic streets of Kyoto, the wild coasts of Scotland. The possibilities were all mine. I booked a 2-week trip to New Zealand for the fall. I used my points for a first-class ticket, something I would never have dared to do for myself before. It was my money, my work, my reward. As I clicked confirm on the booking, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt light. I felt free. I was finally investing in myself, and the return was already immeasurable. The Bank of Claire was still open, but from now on, it was serving only one customer, me. For anyone out there who feels like they are the designated ATM for their family, for anyone whose love is measured in dollars and cents, I hope my story gives you a bit of strength. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it's self-preservation. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is love yourself enough to walk away from people who are incapable of loving you back.